let's walk through the live market test. Before I get started talking specifically about the live market test, I want to tell you two things. They are relevant here because the first thing explains why I have a certain bias that I have. And the second explains how I came up with this live market test approach, which I don't take sole credit for, but I did kind of accidentally stumble across it and realized that it's a powerful but limited tool for doing market research. What a lot of folks would want to think of as market validation, but you've heard me warn you, there is nothing that will tell you for sure this market's going to work, definitely for sure for you. Even so, it's a useful tool. Let me start with the first thing, which is this situation that happened pretty commonly over the years as I got into providing advice about specialization. I come from a technology background in terms of my career before I started working for myself, before I started focusing on marketing and some of the topics that I'm focused on now around expertise. And because of that background in technology, well, I'll interrupt myself and say that in technology, men are overrepresented, other folks are underrepresented. So I would have a lot of men show up in the following situation. They were in their 40s, maybe getting into their 50s, around the time a lot of men start to get gray hair or lose their hair. And they would show up with this desire and this situation. The situation was, I'm tired of this cycle of getting up to speed on the next technology that I need to be current on to be relevant in the marketplace. And what I want to do is I want something else, and I think specialization can help me. And they're not wrong about the problem, how eventually a lot of folks, not everyone, but a lot of folks just do get tired of this thing that feels like running to stay in place, especially in the world of technology, especially in the world of custom software. The tools are changing a lot. They're improving generally, but they're changing a lot. And so there's this sort of constant need to be learning the latest tools. For some folks are able to avoid this, but a lot of folks, they have to just keep learning constantly in order to stay relevant in the marketplace. And a lot of my clients would come to me at this certain point in their career and say, I'm really tired of this. I want something else. And what they were looking for from specialization is an option to move into what would be the self-employed equivalent of in an employee track, moving from an individual contributor role into a management role. And management has its own set of challenges for sure, and it's not what everyone wants, but there's a reason that a lot of folks do move out of the individual contributor track into management. The management is a different learning curve, it's a different challenge. And for a lot of folks, they can see themselves growing with that challenge rather than feeling like the market has moved on, and in order to catch up, they need to learn some new skills. They feel like management is something that will work better in their 40s, 50s, and beyond. And I think they're right. In the self-employed world, I think the equivalent of that is getting paid for your advice, or getting paid more abstractly, more generally, for your thinking and the value of your thinking. That's a bias that I have. It comes out of this moment. Sometimes it's really just heartbreaking to see the pain that these folks are in, because they are wanting a change. And they're at a moment when it's for them a moment of weakness. They're not making this change from a place of strength. They're making this change from, not again, I can't do this again, I don't want to do this again. And I'm not saying it's too late at that point, But the timing is not great for you to be at that moment of frustration, perhaps burnout, and to say, I want to switch tracks away from, the self-employed equivalent of an individual contributor track to the self-employed equivalent of a management track. You can make that transition for sure. And I think that it's a good one, but don't wait until it's too late, until you're frustrated and burnt out and you just feel like you don't have the energy for a big skill retooling. Because if you don't have the energy for that, you probably won't have the energy for this transition. So seeing this moment, seeing the pain that these folks are in and feeling bad for that and doing what I can to help, but sometimes finding that they have waited too late, it's heartbreaking. It has led me to have a bias, which is, the bias is this, very simply. The faster you can move into getting paid for your thinking or giving advice, the more options and flexibility you will have in your career. For sure, getting paid to give advice, to be an advisor, has its own set of stresses. It's not some, like magical, never have anything to worry about kind of career track. It has its own set of stresses and challenges, but I do think it provides more optionality as you age with your career. And again, back to the context that I come from, technology, ageism is a problem there. And so, maybe I'm a little extra sensitive to this issue of how age affects your marketability, your sort of career capital and so forth. Even so, I think almost all of us, as we age, we want a career and a business that grows with us and doesn't force us to relearn skills that ultimately feel like they're going to age into irrelevance. I'm all for, periodic reinvention of the business in pursuit of more interesting or better opportunities. But that's different than feeling like there's a ticking clock that is a sort of personal doomsday clock that's counting down the value of the skills you have today until they become irrelevant, and then you have to retool. I find that for folks in their 20s and 30s, that constant learning curve can be very exciting. And I'm not trying to talk anybody out of spending some time in that mode. I am trying to confess to a bias, explain why I have that bias. And that sets us up a little bit for this lecture on the live market test, because you'll see that bias come through. This live market test is constructed in a certain way to test the market's response to your thinking, not your implementation ability. And I want to say there's nothing wrong with having a business where most or all of what you do is implementing for clients who don't have the ability or desire to do that implementation themselves. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do have this strong bias that you should be keeping one eye on what it would take for you to move into being paid for your thinking, not your doing. And then, with a lot of projects, those two things are somewhat inseparable. You have to do both. But I want to make sure that as you build your business, as you develop your career, you have the option to get invited to strategy discussions. That would make me very happy, but also I think that would insulate you against this really potentially heartbreaking moment. When I started to learn about specialization and positioning, I thought, I'll write about this. I think this is something people need to learn about more. This would have been back in, I think, 2014 or so. And I had some ideas about positioning specialization. I thought I had a desire to write about them. And one of the first things I did was I was a part of some sort of forum of other freelancers. And I created a post. It was pretty short, I don't know, maybe 500 words or so. And I listed all of the fears that I saw interfering with people's ability to specialize. And then I said, does this resonate with you? That was essentially the post on this little forum. And I got this really strong, vigorous response where people said, oh my gosh, yes. That resonates so much with me. I feel that. I feel like that describes me. I don't think I got any like negative feedback on it. It was all that sort of like, wow, yeah, it feels like you've really seen inside of me and understood something about what I feel and experience when I consider specializing. I had, without planning to, had just done a live market test. I had taken an element of my thinking, packaged it up in a way that was easy for folks to consume. These folks weren't total strangers to me, but also their really positive response was not disingenuous. They weren't just saying nice things just because they liked me. Maybe they don't like me. Anyway, they weren't just saying nice things just because they know me and wanted to preserve the relationship, the social status. They were saying nice things, I think, because they really meant it, because this piece of thinking really resonated for them. It really affected them. It had value for them. Well, again, I had just accidentally done a live market test. I'd taken a piece of my thinking, put it in front of a group of people, some of whom later bought the book that grew out of this line of thinking. And I observed their response. I asked for their feedback and I observed their response. That's a live market test. That book, I self-published, always have, and continue to self-publish it. At the time, when I put it into the market, it was a $19 PDF. And then I raised the price and added some, tiers to it and sold it in an info product style with 3 price tiers. And that book has generated over $100,000 in sales from a little bit over 2,000 customers. And it's now been updated, significantly revised, slightly retitled, and it's available as the positioning manual for independent consultants on Amazon's bookstore. And the price is now in alignment with what a typical business book costs, $9, I think, for the Kindle and about $20 for the print book. So I'm really glad that this live market test, in part, it energized me to commit more deeply to this idea, this hypothesis that I had. And the hypothesis, I don't think I really formulated it in any, crisp, formal way in my mind, but the hypothesis was, I think people would like to learn about positioning and specialization, and maybe by understanding what holds them back from it, the fear that they face, they'll be more able to move through that fear and get the advantages of this change in their business. And talking about the fear has ever since then been a really significant thread of how I talk about this topic, because, for big businesses, it's kind of a calculated gamble they're making. But for small businesses like ours, it feels so personal. You've heard me talk about this earlier in this course. That's where my first experience with the live market test came from. There was nothing on the line for me. I had not written the book yet. This was all, again, I wasn't super aware of what I was doing, but it was a form of testing that I did prior to a deeper commitment to that hypothesis. And that's, in some ways, the ideal time to do that testing, because there's less sunk cost if something other than what I experienced happens. And the complete opposite of what I experienced potentially could have happened. I could have posted that post and literally nobody could have responded. It could have been the case that literally everybody who looked at it said, "No, that's not me." And maybe some people would respond with a clear negative, and they would reply to the post and say, "Yeah, no, that's not really what's holding me back from specialization. It's something else," or whatever. Or it could have been crickets. It could have been that folks read the post and said, "This isn't even worth the time to reply in the reply box. This is so irrelevant to me, I'm just going to ignore it." That's another potential outcome. And the result of those potential outcomes, the more sort of negative, that would have been information. That would have been valuable information. But it would have been super discouraging. It would have made me think, oh man, this idea has little or no relevance. That would have been what I would have thought. And the reality is, maybe the timing was bad. If I'd gotten that negative response or gotten ignored, maybe it wasn't that the idea was bad, but that the timing of me running this test was bad. Or maybe there's something about the way I ran the test that was bad. Or maybe there's, this audience that I had access to through the forum. And then maybe there's this other audience over here that would have loved the idea, but I don't have access to them. And so it's a good idea, wrong audience. So I could have misinterpreted the results of this test. That is why I'm so cautious to warn you about all the sort of constraints and things to be aware of, all the complexities of the live market test. It can be an excellent tool for reducing uncertainty about whether a market wants what you have to offer. And it's easy to get it wrong. There's no testing or validation or research tool that's perfect, and some of these tools are hard to use. And this is one of the better ones, I think. But it's also, there's some complexity around using it, and that can cause you to get bad results. It's sort of like a finely tuned lab instrument. And that lab instrument can get really, amazing, accurate results. But if you use it wrong, its sensitivity will bring in noise and spurious results and so forth. And then you'll get, the opposite, or you'll get unhelpful information, or you may get deceived entirely. So that's the danger. Nevertheless, I want you to be aware of how to use a live market test. I want you to understand how it works. And so we're going to walk through in this lecture how the live market test works.